Welcome to another episode of the Monte and Wolf Show. And we've got to start off, the Clid drama, whatever incident that is going on happened after our show last time. We did talk a little bit about it on Summoning Insight, but we should address that now because the result of what happened with Clid is now that Grizzly is starting. We said this is going to be the big week that we talk about Hanwha Life, obviously, because they were facing some real opponents. Tragically, they had to use Grizzly, although Grizzly in the second match actually looked kind of good.
He's got hands.
He's got hands, which was interesting. So let's start there. So for those of you guys who don't know, Clid, so allegedly what has happened is that there were some DMs that were leaked from a couple of female fans now where he was basically being very sexually aggressive to them. We don't know if this translated into actions or not. It seems like there's some sort of investigation going on right now, but there's some details that have been made public without any kind of investigation or confirmation. As a result, Clid has been benched, I assume, until this investigation concludes, right, Wolf? What's the latest?
I mean, essentially right now, because of those somewhat inappropriate text messages that were leaked, Hanwha is doing an ongoing investigation. They've been very quiet about this, whereas Shadow Corp, his agency, has made a statement basically saying, like, kind of defending him, but also not really, like, kind of throwing him under the bus on one hand, but also kind of saying, like, okay, well, like, he didn't intend for this to be really messed up. Kind of protecting themselves, it seemed like, overall. And they also, like, released some of the personal information of the person in the Kakao Talk screenshot, and Kakao Talk is basically like WhatsApp for Korea. And then the fans have been pretty upset about it. Obviously, the Korean fans have sent a truck. You guys have probably seen the news about this, basically asking for Hanwha and LCK to come clean and actually like make statements about this, because the LCK also hasn't said anything about this. And so, people are generally unhappy. I think the Western side of things, obviously, you guys probably are more familiar with that, but people are pretty unhappy. And you've had reporters like Ashley, like, really grilling Hanwha Life Esports, like, every day that they appear. And finally, they gave a statement to Ashley yesterday saying that they have no statement to give yet. But at least they answered. So, I'm not really surprised that Hanwha is trying to get the facts straight of this, because we have had in the past some of these situations where players are accused of something like this and it actually that ends up not coming true. So, before like completely condemning Clid, they want to make sure they get like all of the facts straight, I guess. Although based on what the agency said, he seems likely guilty of at least some of those messages that were shown, because they kind of claimed that already. And additionally, like, in Korea, there are really strong anti-defamation laws. And what that means is that if you actually, as Hanwha Life, for example, say that you're benching Clid or you're firing Clid because he did these inappropriate things, first of all, like, that may or may not be true, and then you could get in big trouble there. But also, even if it is true, you have to be really careful about what you say about Clid and why you fire him, because Clid could then potentially sue you. So this is guys, a big issue.
Yeah, so just to be clear, in Korea, anti-defamation, you can lose even if you are telling the truth about somebody.
Yeah.
So if you defame somebody about horrible things that they did, they can sue you and win, which is very unique to Korea. It's one of the things I really don't like about Korea.
It creates a lot of problems.
Yeah, and meanwhile, like, obviously, in the United States, and many Western countries, but especially in the United States, anti-defamation, you would have to actually prove damages. It would have to be proven, like, basically willfully false, as if you were willfully slandering someone if you were wrong, which is obviously extremely hard to do. So it's really, really different in Korea. And yeah, that means, I mean, we just don't have enough information about what's going on. And until there is actually an investigation that occurs either via the press, whether that's going to be Ashley Kang or Korean media that are doing that, or if it's going to be the LCK, or if it's going to be Hanwha themselves, we just don't have enough information. And all we have are kind of some texts that were leaked on Twitter.
So like, at this point in time, like, it's hard to delve into exactly what it means, but we know that obviously Hanwha is playing with Grizzly, which we knew about. The casters, we were told like basically the day of, because we asked like, okay, who's going to play tomorrow? Because I wanted to know. I actually changed my predictions based on this, because I actually had Hanwha beating D plus, but then when I saw Grizzly was coming, I was like, no, I'm going D plus. I changed my prediction because I was like, well, I mean, I know this, so I'm going to change my prediction. And then obviously, like, going into the situation, Grizzly looked pretty bad in the first match, but the second match he looked a little bit better. But it's really stressful for Hanwha because you're losing these matches now that are really important, and we're also maybe going to be a week where you really bounced back. And then B, you have all of this PR and stuff. It's attacking the players who aren't even involved in this, attacking the org. And then you also have, like, if Grizzly continues to fail, if he struggles or if he looks bad, you've devalued this player you may want to potentially sell to other regions, who is like kind of a rising star suddenly in challengers, but then he looks bad, and it's like, oh man, you're just losing on every way.
All right, I don't think he's looked bad, to be fair.
Yeah, but if he did, right, and he didn't look great in the first series.
You know, I think the first series is forgivable. We'll get into that because we did say we'd talk about Hanwha this week. But speaking of changing your predictions, Wolf, actually on Competitive Edge, which Thorne and I do for the Esports Bet channel, I put an actual prediction on D plus Kia to win because they had like 1.7 odds. And I thought, you know, even if they didn't make a substitution for Clid, like this would have completely destabilized this team internally. Because every time this happens, guys, you have to cancel scrims. You don't know what's going to happen. Like, even if Clid does play potentially, like, it's probably not going to be the first thing on his mind playing well in the game. It's going to affect his play. So there were actually opportunities, you know, for D plus to win. So, by the way, shout out to Esports Bet, and you can go check out Competitive Edge on their YouTube channel. And in LCK this week, we actually do have another Last Free Nation match of the week. It's going to be T1 versus GenG, which is very exciting. And if you use our referral code, which you can see below, and you can click on down below, if you sign up with that, not only can you get a 50% deposit bonus up to $100 or a $100 risk-free first bet, you can also, every time we have a match of the week for Last Free Nation, which is going to be every week until the end of Worlds, guys, you can get an extra 10% if you predict correctly. So an extra 10% winnings on our match of the week. So that's where you want to sign up. Pick, by the way, spoiler, guys, pick GenG. That's who you should be picking. Yeah. Should definitely be picking GenG.
And you can probably get good odds, too.
You can probably get good odds because T1 already, like I said, about the KT match, guys. People got KT at like over 3. I got them at 2.8. It was a crazy good day. And if you got them at those odds and you got an extra 10%, you made a lot of money. So pick GenG. Definitely pick GenG. You will get good odds. And yeah, that was a great time to do that. Remember, you can't get over $100 USDT or its equivalent in DJT or another cryptocurrency as the 10%. So there's a cap on that. And it only counts on your first wager. So don't do it like 10 times, guys. It only counts on the first one, obviously. Yeah. Anyway.
Obviously.
So there you go. Thank you to Esports Bet. And yeah, so let's talk about Grizzly a little bit. So you actually have been casting a lot of challengers, so you can give us some context because I have not been watching challengers. So I have to watch all these other regions, so I don't do that. So tell us about Grizzly.
He's a player who's pretty good at like engaged junglers, and he likes his Viego. He also likes Lee Sin quite a bit. And he hasn't played like the entire time in challengers because he's been splitting time with Guan, the other challengers jungler, but it seems like Hanwha has kind of considered him to be the better jungler right now based on internal scrim results, and he's looking better for them in challengers. And like some people would make the case right now that Hanwha's challengers team is the second best behind D plus Kia's challengers team. KT's dropped off a little bit in challengers. DRX is looking a little bit shaky, even though none of those players got pulled up to the main roster. They went from Academy for some reason, so DRX's roster is like still the same. They had the MVP from last season, but just to give context to like where Hanwha is in challengers, like they're pretty high up. I'd say most people put them at least in top 3 right now. So he's a top 3 jungler in challengers because he's replaced Guan, and I think that he's a player that is pretty good at mechanical plays, and his gank timings are generally not as crisp as like how he executes them, if that makes sense. We often talk about players like as junglers, especially on this show, as brain junglers or hands junglers. He's definitely in the hands junglers section right now. I think in that second series that happened yesterday with Hanwha Life against Gen.G, he definitely left his bottom lane out to dry when he needed to be there for them. And Peanut got to run that lane. So, sometimes he does nothing and like is on Raptors while his entire team is falling apart. But then sometimes he defeats the entire team on Viego and transforms into 5 champions and wins the fight. So,
and looks good mechanically on all those 5 champions too.
I think that Hanwha thinks very highly of him. So at least they are fortunate in that it's one of their stronger players they can actually pull up. Scandal aside, like they actually have a decent replacement, and he has performed decently well enough. And also Grizzly is a player who seemingly is pretty. I mean, I'm just assuming this based on seeing him on camera, like the camera interactions with him. He seems pretty friendly. He seems pretty like good mindset player. He's not like you have a bunch of challengers players who are super shy or super nervous or don't communicate a lot. He doesn't seem like that. He seems like a pretty outgoing guy. Seems like he gets along with people pretty well. That's just my assumption. I could be totally wrong about that, but when you see him on stage, he doesn't look like he sticks out like a sore thumb like some of the other substitutes we've seen, like when Lospa played during the COVID era for GenG. He had a 1 good game at Alistair, whatever, but he looked like he was like, oh my god, I'm playing LCK. This is really stressful. Grizzly looked like he just slotted kind of right in. I don't feel like he had too many nerve issues or anything like that. So maybe he ends up being the replacement for the rest of the season. I could see it happening. It depends on what happens with Clid and what Hanwha Life decide to do with all the fan pressure. It's hard to imagine a world where Clid comes back to play this season. And the LCK may not even allow that. So I don't know what will happen, but I feel like if he plays for the rest of the season, maybe he can get to a level of play to where he can gel with this team, and maybe they can close out the second round robin on a high note potentially. But I think it's going to take time. The other thing is Clid, he wasn't that great anyways. So like he had some highs, but they were not frequent.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly made like a lot of individual mistakes, but the argument was that he's the shot caller of the Hanwha Life roster. So are they going to be hurt more significantly in terms of late game macro or objective control? I mean, they were arguably hurt by this because Clid would frequently int on objectives, but. Do you think going to be a big part of this? Because Kingen and Zeka were not the biggest voices of DRX when they won Worlds last year. That was Beryl, right? And he long has been that kind of authoritative shot caller on those rosters. And so are Kingen and Zeka used to playing in a more collaborative shot calling style, or is Grizzly, who's a rookie, going to be able to fill that gap? It seems rather unlikely.
It does seem unlikely to me too, because when you look at Kingen and Zeka when they were on DRX, it was like you have Pioshik, who's very vocal, and you have Deft, who also is at times, not always, but at times is very vocal as well, and seems to be doing a lot of shot calling, and at least like judgmental calls, like on whether the objectives will be done or not, or like whether they think they can win team fights or not, just based on comms we've seen. So I think this is an opportunity for Zeka and Kingen to really change their role within the team now that the main shot caller is gone, and maybe they could show some of their veteran backgrounds. Viper obviously as well might try to change the team atmosphere around playing through bottom side a little bit more. And I said this on the analyst desk after that Gen.G series, but I really feel like the way that D Plus is winning with Deft and playing through Deft, like Hanwha should just do that right now, because like they can play through Viper and put him on Draven and put him on even Lucian, even though Lucian's not that strong right now, or try to get him ahead on Aphelios and try to play tempo around that with some level 6 timing and stuff like that. I think maybe that's the way you play, because Kingen, he's probably not going to be the guy you can play through right now. A lot of teams are finding success playing through top with Sejuani Renekton, with Jax. I don't think that this is going to be the way that Kingen finds a lot of success, unfortunately. So I want to see that they play through Viper a little bit more. Maybe kind of tell Grizzly, like, you're playing through Viper now. This is a Viper-oriented team now, completely. Because it was before, but like almost by accident, because they never really empowered him. But it's like, no, now it is a Viper-based team only. Like D Plus is a Deft-based team only. Needs to be.
Well, and that's what's so confusing, I think, about Hanwha Life, is because we're still not seeing that, right? It was back to Kingen playing Jax. Like Kingen, for those of you who didn't watch just Worlds last year, Kingen's best champion was Ornn last year. On the whole, super good super good Ornn player at times. We got to see all of those like flash Ornn ults and everything like that. But this is a guy who needs to be playing weak side. He is not the hard carry of this team.
He's a decent Scion, you know. He could play a Scion for you. You could sit there, take it.
But it is baffling, Wolf, that this team has not yet figured out how to play around Viper. And even though I think that the series versus Gen.G was surprisingly close, part of that again was Gen.G making some mistakes. But at
Toby
the end of the
wasn't
day,
there, man. He didn't show up, so.
what I mean, his LeBlanc was good. His LeBlanc was good. In game number 1, his Azir was game number 2. But yeah, I think it is very fascinating that they haven't yet figured out in a meta that is so ADC dependent how to properly play around Viper, especially because Viper is still extremely good.
Yeah,
And
he really is.
I mean, I think that's what's so crazy is, you know, the first game of Gen.G versus Hanwha Life, Viper did an insane job of like dodging the level 3 stacked wave tower dive and getting some good value out of that, and then having some effect on the kind of mid to late game team fights on the Kai'Sa, which is a champion that's on the up and up right now.
I mean, remember in spring too, we were, it was around like maybe week 4 or so, like it was around this time when Hanwha Life started to play front to back, and they started to actually play like Ornn and Sion and just front to back for Viper, and we were like, oh, they figured it out, they're doing it, like,
they did it.
And then somehow we forgot it, and now we're back to not doing it again. And yeah, it's not the greatest meta ever for you know, just straight up playing tanks topside. Like, we are oftentimes seeing that Renekton versus Jack side laning is a big thing. And we're even seeing like Renekton take Demolish because he can side lane really well. We're seeing a little bit of return of Hullbreaker Gnar from Zeus, right? Like, top lane has to have an impact to set up on objectives. Like, you have to be able to be a threat insides a little bit. Renekton, I think, is the biggest offender of this because he needs to get ahead with Sejuani. Otherwise, like, why are you playing this champion? Because even though he has Demolish, he's not going to do as much. But anyway, we're seeing that be like the dominant force rather than playing Sion, rather than playing Ornn on the top side. We're seeing a little bit less Gragas because he got nerfed, but, you know, he's kind of the default weak side but can still engage champion. He's kind of like the middle ground. I'd rather see Kingen on Gragas, Sion, or Ornn than see him on Renekton, unfortunately, or the Jax, because it's just not his strong suit. Team doesn't know how to play around that. Then if Viper falls behind or even just goes straight up even if he gets no resources and stays even, then, you know, you could still win, but like, why aren't you playing to win hard? Like, why aren't you playing to actually get your strongest player to a great spot is the real question. And it's just strange because I get it now that you have Grizzly in here. Things get a little bit weird. Like, your priority is going to be all over the place in terms of where you're going on the map, and you want to play comfort picks for Grizzly. But it feels like you could have just told Grizzly, like, we're playing through bottom side. Like, just cover bottom. Like, let Kingen go, and we're going to put him on a tank. And then it actually just becomes a simpler problem because your jungler is focused on one part of the map, not, you know, completely, but primarily. And then his job becomes simpler because he's not playing reactionary. Whereas they put him in a position where he had to play reactionary, and he couldn't quite figure it out, you know. And Peanut's a way better jungler than he is, so... You know.
Well, I think actually, at least in the first game, because remember, this is I was fucking loving this, Wolf, because there's nothing I love more than some Peanut level 1 Poppy flash shenanigans, or flashing over a dragon pit wall. Like, the way that he set up to try and catch them out by flashing a wall into a brush and then waiting till Hex Flash came up and then Hex flashing to try and invade if they're blue was really good. And I mean, it makes sense. This is how you destabilize a rookie jungler if you're going into that game. But in spite of the aggressive approach, they didn't get anything from it. And Grizzly, I thought, did a really good job of reacting to what was going on by counter jungling and kind of playing opposite sides of the map. And that's a tough situation for a player to be in his third professional game.
I mean, Peanut really was. I mean, the game plan was definitely like, all right, let's wreck the rookie. And
Yeah.
they did. Even though the level 1, like you said, didn't end up successful, the follow up ganks, they were. And, you know, Grizzly wasn't there to cover. Like, he was on Raptors when they had that dive that was really successful bottom side, where Delight actually, you know, hard carried on the Rakan and came in and they got those kills. Like, that's, you know, one of those things where you feel pressure because you know that Peanut's pushing in hard all the time and you want to try to counter jungle and get some money. But also, like, if you just stay down there and prevent that from happening, then Viper does better, and then you have a better win condition, right? So it's hard to know these things. And also, even though we are like, Grizzly didn't know like the Viper's the greatest and like they should play through him, but like Hanwha doesn't know that like Viper's the greatest and they should play with him. So, you know.
I think you just have to wait till Viper gets freed from this roster at this point in time. But at least, at least this happened before the second round robin started, because it's not like there is a definitive, even basically, I would argue potentially with how T1 is playing, even third place team right now. And there's certainly no definitive fourth place team, because both D+, Kia, and Hanwha have been a little bit ropey. And I'm not going to read too much into D+'s win over a brand new jungle player in his first matches, right?
Yeah.
Especially because they probably didn't even have much time to play with him, because the Clid information was just so sudden. They may have had 0 scrims with this guy, like, before that match happened.
Probably 0 scrims is the likely answer, because like, why would he be scrimming with them?
Right.
Especially with Clid being the shot caller. So another thing that I guess could happen, but would have to happen like within the next day or two, like might already be too late now, is Hanwha could try to sign a replacement jungler before round 2, because round 2 is in the middle of next week. Dread?
Honestly, I don't see why you do that. Grizzly, I think, had some really standout moments, particularly on the Viego, getting the triple kill around the dragon. Like, you can see the upside to this guy.
No, I mean, like, he has hands, and like, any other jungler you get is going to also have the same problems in terms of like working with the team, because he's going to be coming in the last second in the second round robin, and will not have the ability to gel with the team instantly either. So why not invest in a player that's already part of your org, who could potentially translate into, if he can figure it out, like moving up into the org next year with maybe some of these players, if the team stays together. My money is on it's definitely not going to happen, but they could sign somebody. I don't think they will, because it costs money, and there's very few free agents. Like, Dread's the only one that really comes to mind as a standout pick that's available right now that has experience. So,
and if Grizzly's going to look halfway decent, you might as well roll the dice on him and see if you can get anything together. Like I said, especially because you have a more than a round robin to get your shit together at this point in time, which should be enough time. And it's not like the competition is incredibly fierce. You would still say that Hanwha have a very, at least like probably a 50-50 shot of making worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I think
at this point,
that's really concerning to say, but yeah,
it's true though.
It's not a good. It's true. It's true.
It's
like, we don't like it. We don't like to say it, but it is true.
I think Gen.G and KT are looking relatively good. I think KT is looking the best. GenG still has some flaws, but should be, certainly good enough to make top 4. T1's likely in that boat as well. So unless you believe in some insane overperformance by like Kwangdong or probably Brion at this point in time, honestly, it's pretty much between D+ and Hanwha for that 4th spot.
Yeah, it is.
It's not a great look for Korea, guys. Look,
it's not good. It's not good. I'll be honest with you guys. I'm not feeling very good about our chances.
At Worlds,
I'm watching T1 play, and I'm like, ooh, that's not it. I'm watching Hanwha and D+. I'm like, ooh. I'm watching GenG sometimes, even a wins, and I'm like, maybe we tighten this up a little bit. Like,
it's okay. KT is Korea's big hope. I mean, especially if you saw LNG's game this last week, it's like, uh-oh. Well, if LNG also has gotten their shit together at this point in time, like, how stacked is LPL? It's going to be, I think the top 4 from LPL are going to be absolutely insane. But yeah, it's going to be a bit ropey, I think, for LCK this year, especially with this problem.
At least they got a bad Asia Games team, and maybe we can get some of these players military exception.
That's true. They did get a weirdly bad Asian Games team, whereas Korea's Asian Games team has Ruler on it. So
they stole Ruler and Kanavi. So there's always hope there. At least
there's
that's
always
the international will win.
Oh boy. So yeah, let's talk about Faker a little bit, because there was also some kind of troubling news that's come out about Faker's hand and an alleged injury that stretches back to the Brion match in week number 2. And certainly I would say Faker did not look 100% this week. And I would argue that this split, I think he had an outstanding spring split, and he hasn't really lived up to that so far in the summer.
Yeah, he had, so there's, unfortunately for him, like, he's having a bit of a rough split, and he had some signs, like, we were kind of wondering about it, like, last week. We were like, "Ooh, he looks like he might maybe have, like, a little bit of pain in his wrist or in his arm," because you just looked like when you just look at his hands when he's playing, or you also look at him walking around, like he's grabbing his arm, and it felt like, okay, maybe something's going on. This happens a lot in Korean esports, where players practice for hours and hours and hours, right, and play for extended periods of time, like longer career games like StarCraft and League of Legends, where those careers are much longer than, for example, Overwatch. And those games are also much more mechanically demanding in terms of what you have to do with your fingers and your hands and your wrists, than a lot of other games. I think, like, those problems could occur in Overwatch, like if you played for 5-6 years nonstop, but that wasn't really the case in Korea.
Yeah, it's
So
also FPS in general. You tend to use more of your, whole arm for FPS aiming, and you don't move your left hand very much.
yeah,
Whereas obviously in League and StarCraft, there's a lot of kind of small movement that's happening with both hands simultaneously as you're moving it on the keyboard and also moving your mouse, mostly with your wrist.
yeah. So it's smaller movements, and that's the problem. Nobody knows exactly what happened, like, but the assumption is some sort of carpal tunnel, is what, like, people are thinking is going on. But he made a statement, basically, to the press, saying that, like, yeah, he's been feeling bad since the Bro match, which was almost like 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago or so. So that explains some of the play. The Korean fans have been less than enthusiastic about Faker's play recently, and I was actually watching the play and then looking online and see what people were saying, because it looked really rough around the edges this week in particular. But I'm glad he made a statement about it, because Faker's the kind of guy who usually kind of keeps that stuff to himself. He doesn't want to make excuses, even though it's like not an excuse, it's just his physical condition. But yeah, people who were in the press room told me that, like, he was, like, unable to, like, lift his arm, or unwilling to lift his arm when he went into that interview, and was kind of like holding it to the side. So it sounds like he's really struggling quite a bit. And I think they even said, I mean, this is the word that was on the street, like, before the interview came out, but I think he even said that they're considering, like, can I continue playing over the next few weeks, or do we need to find someone else?
Oh boy.
And right now, the only player who's really eligible is Sky, one of their coaches, who is on the roster officially in case of emergencies, and they listed him as such so that he can play and be eligible. And Poby, the challengers mid, is not as good as Sky. Let's just say. Like,
So guys, for those of you who don't know, T1's challenger team is the second. They're ranked 8th place out of 10 right now, and they have a record of 2-6, and they have 2 mid laners, which are Poby and Nice. And I know nothing about these guys, so you tell me about them.
Nice is so Poby replaced Bay. So Bay was the mid laner for T1 challengers, which is weird because Bay was on Nongshim for a while, then he went to PCS, and then he came back to Korea, played on challengers, which is weird because you usually don't invest in players like this in challengers, but I think T1 just wanted to have somebody who has some experience there. He was there, then he's gone now. Poby's there. Poby is, to put it nicely, like, he's pretty green. He is not great. He's a very weak player at the moment, and he gets crushed by almost everybody in lane. And his team fighting is not good. Nice is a player who plays under him, and I haven't actually had the opportunity to cast any Nice games yet. I think he played like maybe 2 this season, as Chronicler was mentioning him to me. He doesn't look good either, but he is also playing under Poby, who is definitely not good. So, like, this is not even like okay, like, Faker's way better than Closer, but, like, we'll see. It's not like that. It's like Faker is like a million times better even at his low form he's at right now than Poby. So it's just not, and so then Nice being under Poby means it's just not going to happen. Like, these players can't play in the LCK right now.
It's also that we know that Faker and Carry are the biggest voices on this team, and Faker lacks in potentially mechanical acumen at this point in career, he's making up for in terms of game knowledge and shot calling abilities, and serving as kind of an in-game coach for the most part. So I think it's really difficult to replace him, because without him, the entire shot calling apparatus basically collapses from within in T1.
So I mean, we've had a lot of players who've gone through wrist problems in the past, like very serious ones, end up recovering. I think Flash is probably the most notable example. He had really bad wrist problems, and for those who don't know, Flash is basically like the Faker of StarCraft Brood War. Like, he played for a really long time. He was at the top basically throughout his entire career. And by the end of it, I mean, he's had some scandals and stuff recently, and he's not like the king of StarCraft so much so anymore. Just got out of the military. But like at the end of his career, before he went to the military, he was winning everything so hard he got bored. He switched to random, and was like playing tournaments as random to see if
instead of
like
Terran,
he would still
which was
win
his
everything.
normal race.
Yeah. So he's a player who's been very successful, right? Even after his wrist issues, when he famously got surgery to actually fix his wrist and get work done on his carpal tunnel. So he ended up recovering very well, and like he's fine. Faker may have to do something similar. I hope not. You know, nobody wants to have to get surgery. Nobody wants to have to go through these things. Maybe he needs some time off, and then the rest will be good enough. Because considering how long Faker's career is, or has been, and how long he's been at the top, the fact that this is only really affecting him so much that he's speaking publicly about it now means
which is
that maybe
10
he
years
actually,
after his debut. It's actually impressive that it's taken this long, Wolf, in many ways.
That's what I'm saying. So like maybe actually something really did go wrong. Like maybe he did something to his wrist in a bad way in that BRION series and like really hurt himself, and he actually needs just a few weeks, and then he's actually going to be back to normal, because it seems like he's taking care of his wrists very well. And obviously he has T1, which is an insanely good support staff for the players and make sure they're always healthy and stuff like that. So maybe he just takes 2 weeks off, and we have awkward 2 weeks with Sky, or hopefully not Poby. And then Faker's recovered and he comes back, and then he continues to take care of his wrists, and like it's not an ongoing chronic problem. That's my hope. That's what I hope happens. I don't know what's going to happen. We'll have to wait and see. But I think Faker, he said he's undergoing treatment right now, and he's got the long weekend to prepare before they go into their matches next week. Fingers crossed, maybe he just feels better and he plays, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen.
Yeah, and that obviously could really mix up the standings as well. Not that Faker has been outstanding, but just because it would be very difficult with their current group of players to replace even a less than ideal performing Faker within this roster. So I think it'd be quite tough.
And yeah, I mean, I think it probably explains part of his underperformances, because some of the issues were like mechanical, which is something that you almost never say about Faker. Like,
yeah, he did look a little rough, especially in game 2 versus D+, like on the LeBlanc, because I don't think his decision making was necessarily that bad, but it really did look a little awkward mechanically sometimes. But they did defeat D+. They did take them down. So, and then they had a rougher match against Nongshim, but I'm not sure how much they really prepared for that one in particular. Could have been a little bit of a trap game for them, but probably anticipated an easier opponent.
I think the Neela game, that one was the first game, the one that Nongshim actually won. That was a game that T1 kind of walked into underprepared and didn't really know how to deal with the comp, which is weird because it was even like
Neela?
one of, yeah, exactly. It was like our point of the match that like Guma plays Neela and Jiu plays Neela. Will we see Neela today? And I was like rolling my eyes, like it's probably not going to happen today. But we're forcing this narrative, right? And then actually it happened. Jiu plays it, and then the team looked lost against it. And I mean, Jiu had a great game. Like Nongshim overperformed at the same time as T1 underperformed. But Karya had a really weak series, and he was
which is
playing
surprising because Karya had a very good series against D+. So
Yeah.
he just kind of, one good, one bad this past week. I thought his engages in the D+ series were mostly on point, but the Nongshim series, he was definitely struggling.
And he tried to play Braum like an engaged champion to save the game, and it was unfortunately not the right play. And then he had some good plays on Rel later on in the series. Like he wasn't like all rough around the edges. Like he had some diamond in the rough moments, let's say, in that series. But he looked a little bit frustrated. The whole team looked a little bit angry about how things were going down. Luckily, they were able to take the win in the end because Zeus popped off on Gnar, and it was okay in the end. But that series did not fill me with hope that T1, even if we just pretend like not only is Faker no wrist issues and also he's playing at his peak form from spring, like okay, let's not say that, but like he's playing at least like he's not playing badly, okay? He's not having the issues he's had this week. If Faker is normal and the rest of the team is playing like they are, I don't think they beat GenG. I don't think they take a game. GenG just looks way better than them. So now when you add all these issues and coming off of that rocky loss or near loss to Nongshim, game loss, I think they could beat DRX, but GenG, I think that's a bridge too far right now.
Yeah, I do want to talk about one of the teams that we haven't really discussed yet so far this split, as we kind of close in on the halfway mark of the season this next week, which is everybody's favorite OKSavingsBack BRION, everybody's favorite meme team, because in spite of the fact that this team is towards the bottom of the standings, they are 2-6 tied with DRX for 8th place. They have looked better than a 2-6 team would,
yeah.
I would say. And what's frustrating about this team is you feel like they are kind of close to being actually maybe sort of middle of the pack good, but they can't help themselves in terms of losing or mispositioning in the late game and throwing, which teams like GenG will absolutely take advantage of if you give them that opportunity.
The thing about this team is there's the early game, which they do very well at, and sometimes they do it based on winning skirmishes, where they'll actually just outplay in a skirmish, and then you see Karis do something crazy on his ear or something, and you're like,
this week too, yeah. which they've been swapping out the old mid laners,
and then you see Karis do something like pretty incredible, and you're like, what? Like, why does he not do this all the time? But then they'll win some crazy clutch fight, and then take a massive lead, then do it again, and then start pushing those advantages into the lanes, and then suddenly, like, Brion's 1,000 gold lead goes to a 3,000 gold lead, 3,500, and then they've got map control, they're, like, sitting on Soul Point, they got vision on Baron, and then they just kind of sit there. They're like, let's put more wards on the other side of Baron. There's, like, 18 wards behind Baron. I'm like, you guys could just, like, start, like, you put that there so that you can see them coming, so then you can turn while you're doing Baron.
But wait, Wolf, what if they picked Kalista, right? And then they just didn't do Baron when they had the opportunity, and they waited for GenG to kind of scale, and then would just try to get himself caught like as many times as possible until he dies, and then GenG takes the Baron and kills you. What if they did that instead?
I legitimately think I was telling people, if Kwangdong doesn't make playoffs, I think it's going to be because Bro makes playoffs. But they've got a lot of climbing to do. But if they I
have such a love-hate relationship with
if he plays his early games well, and then they actually turn those leads into wins, which the coaching staff, by the way, I've spoken with, they're very aware of the problem. Like you can see them, like I've spoken with them, you see them and they're like, oh, like they're so mad, like, but they're also just like, well, we did all the plan correctly, but then I can't get these guys to actually like kill the Baron and then turn on the
dude
fight.
when you won't kill the Baron with a massive lead in Kalista, where there's like a 0% chance that you actually flip the Baron, it is just mind-boggling to me. It is mind-boggling.
but then
imagine it. Well, imagine being Brion and having Poppy and Kalista. So you literally have something better than Smite to kill the Baron, and you have a Poppy just in case somebody gets in there, just inject also from
Smite.
the pit.
You also have Smite as well. So you have double Smite and Poppy,
what the fuck,
and a huge lead,
man.
And you have vision around the Baron, and you have waves with a prio in top and mid.
And what if they had both Elder and Baron, and then lost?
So the thing is, like, that they'll also do, which is the part that, like, the waiting part is really annoying, but the more annoying part to me is that they'll at some point, and I think Umpty is the one who does this, they'll wait for a long time and like lose some of their advantages, and then they'll suddenly make a decisive bad call. They'll be like, you know what? Okay, now we're going to do Baron. I'm like, no, you can't. This is the one time you can't do it. This is not the time. They'll be like, oh, we waited too long. We got to do it now. I'm like, well, now you don't have vision. Now you don't have the wave in mid. And you're like, let's start it, I guess. I'm like, no. You had to do that a while ago. Now you actually have to like fight.
My favorite
again.
one is that when they get vision control and then they lose the vision control and then Umti just walks into now an unwarded jungle and dies and then they lose the game.
It makes me mad. It makes me mad. It makes me mad and sad. But I also know, I think we have to acknowledge that this team legit could be good. Like I don't think they're not going to Worlds, okay, but they legit could be a playoff team.
2-6 team. They're not a 2-6.
They're not a 2-6 team. They're not a 2-6 team. I think they honestly are on par with Kwangdong, if not better. And if they had won some of these upset matches in the tough schedule, like if they had taken games off of GenG, even single games, that's going to help their game score if they end up like tying later on. But they could have been the team that goes to playoffs instead. And we've seen this team in the past go to playoffs. We've seen this team punch up. We've seen this team take out D+ earlier in the season. And it's just
D+ with a
turn that into consistency, please.
Giant asterisk. D+ with a sub.
Yeah, true. But they did it nonetheless.
Well, they now beat DRX. You know what? I feel bad for them, Wolf, because next week they have to play KT twice.
Yeah.
They literally have to play KT twice in 3 days, which is, I think, not going to turn out well for them. By the way, if that's how your schedule ends up with a random draw, I think there should be a rule against playing back-to-back matches in the round robin. Like if it happens, it has to switch because it's going to be brutal for Brion to just back-to-back KT like that.
It is. It has happened before. Like there was that famous year where it was like the telecom back-to-back. I think actually it might have even been telecom back-to-back when one of the seasons I was in as well. But there was that OGN season. It was 2017, I think, where this game was super crazy and long and really hype. But yeah, it does happen, but it shouldn't necessarily happen. But it's tough because then you got to redo the whole schedule and you might get it again. I'm kind of like okay with it, but it just sucks for Bro in this case. If it was Bro against Nongshim twice, we'd be like, oh, nice, like chances, double chances. But
yeah, I just feel bad because overwhelmingly they're just going to be 2-8, and then we're going to be saying this is not a 2-8 team, just like they weren't a 2-6 team. They just got mega unlucky, got mega unlucky.
Or Bro actually are Omega Giga Chads and beat KT. I'm not going to expect that.
Yeah, I would be entertained if that happened. By the way, that first match they played against DRX was actually super entertaining because Umti played Skarner, and I thought they did pretty well with the Skarner pick overall. It took them forever to win that game because even though they had massive leads, they refused to win, like we were talking about. I mean, for a team that was, for a team that only died 4 times, the fact that it took them 34 minutes to win that game is kind of illegal.
Yeah, it was. So the first Skarner game, I'm like, oh, this is perfect for this comp. Like they want to come into you. You can turn those engages. You can grab the Yone. The second Skarner, I was like, you guys, you did know why the Skarner was good in game 1, right? because if you're playing it here, I think you didn't know why it was good in game 1, actually.
Yeah.
And I mean, like Edgar has had some question mark drafts sometimes. But overall, I think he's really smart, and he actually does know what are good drafts. His team doesn't always know how to use them in the late game, but I think he's pretty good at drafting. But I didn't really like that game 2 draft. They figured it out in the end against DRX and took that win. But it's like, how could you almost beat GenG, but then like can't cross the finish line against DRX? Like, how are these two things like what your week looks like? How is that like how I sum up a week of a professional team's play?
Also, I do have to take a moment here because it was Morgan. Because remember when Morgan donated the pentakill, and he was such a bro Giga Chad about it. And then in this match, Rascal refused to give the pentakill to Henna. What a bitch Rascal is. He was just running around. He was running around outside of their base while they finished the Nexus, just intentionally not giving Henna the pentakill. That's not cool, Rascal. Be more like Morgan.
So, yeah, a lot of people got upset at Morgan. So maybe Rascal is like running from some demons there. I'm not entirely sure. A lot of Korean fans were pretty mad that he gave a pentakill.
Oh, come on! It was very entertaining. The Western fans loved it. It just adds to the mystique of Lord Morgan.
So like the getting a pentakill goes on your like official record, right? And every player has a certain amount of pentakills. So if you give one, then it might create a scenario in which
Oh,
someone
give me a
has.
break.
I'm
Pentakills are
just
so.
saying. I'm just
I know,
explaining
but
why people were upset.
pentakills are
I'm
just
not
such
giving
an
my opinion.
arbitrary stat anyway because you just have to luck into them. Basically, it's not a skill thing. It's like, oh, I hit the right crits
I
in
mean,
a
it
team
can be
fight.
a skill thing, but usually it's not. I hit the
Usually,
right crits, and my teammates just happen to not get the last hit
yeah,
on the
exactly.
kills.
Like AOE didn't happen to kill them. Instead, my
Yeah.
auto attack as an AD carry did. So I think pentakills are a pretty. They're fun, but they're not a meaningful statistic for players at all.
I mean, it can, like, if you get a pentakill on like Viego 1v5 or something, it's pretty cool, right? But you
Sure.
know, if it's an 80 carry cleaning up a team fight, which it 99% of the time it is, it's like
Yeah.
we yell pentakill, and then it like goes on the record, and then like they get POG just by default, and then everyone's like, "You
Well,
got a
it's
pentakill
also
today."
it also just depends on the champions you play. Like you're gonna get a lot more pentacles if you play fucking Jinx than you
Or
are,
Zeri.
yeah, or Zeri than you are other 80 carries, right? It's just gonna happen more. So if your team just happens to get those champions, it's gonna sway your statistics. So whatever, it's fine.
Anyway, I actually like I see both ways. Like I'm okay with Morgan given the pentakill and being a Giga Chad bro. I also get I respect Rascal being like, no, I'm not giving it to you. I'm actually running away.
Rascal's
I'm
a
getting
bitch.
out.
That's
I respect both sides of it.
you respect the Rascal's a bitch side and also the Rascal's not a bitch side. Fine.
Well, I mean, look. If you don't want to give the pentakill, that's your right as a player. You are in control of the champion. You can control your own fate. You can deny your opponent the pentakill. Why do you care so much? Why are you calling him a bitch if you don't think pentakills are important,
So
Monty?
I'm gonna
That's
flip
the real
your.
question.
I'm gonna flip your because I want to see it because it's fun, not because I think it's an important stat. I'm gonna flip this on you. By running away, he actually definitively lost the game because they were attacking his nexus. Hmm?
I
So
don't think he makes an impact alone to stop them from killing the Nexus.
so he could have tried to stop them from killing the Nexus instead of just running away from giving a pentakill down the mid lane. So there you go.
All right.
He was definitively not trying to win in that circumstance.
He could have also just sat in the fountain and done nothing. But yeah. I mean, I guess he probably couldn't have because he was kind of out there. He wouldn't have been able to get home. He had to run. But
all right. Well, enough about that.
Yeah.
What other topics or teams do we want to talk about? We should probably touch on Gen.G because they play Live Sandbox next to finish the round robin.
Yeah.
And they are overwhelmingly likely to be 9-0. But at the same time, in the same way that BRION is not a 2-6 team, Gen.G should not be an 8-0 team right now. This team has, to their credit, been able to team fight their way back from the brink on several occasions and had a good meta read. I love seeing Peanut returning to the Poppy, which is something that I really enjoyed watching him play last year. And like I said, the early game flash shenanigans are something that I deeply adore about this team. But at the same time, some of their early laning phases have gone badly enough that probably another team should have been able to snowball more wins against them. They arguably should have lost the first series they played against T1 in week 1 of competition. And they just haven't had that unbeatable aura that they had in summer of last year.
Yeah, they certainly do not. I'm liking some of the stuff I'm seeing for them. Like I really like Doran's Renekton, like how he's team fighting with Renekton. I
Yes,
think
not how he's laning with Renekton though. Not how he's laning. But
So I was gonna say like
very good.
his laning phase is fine until he tries to kill people. He needs to be like, you know, the lobsters they have at the supermarket with like the rubber bands on their claws. Like somebody just needs to rubber band his claws so he doesn't get turret aggro. Like just prevent him from getting turret aggro. Because the second he gets in turret range, man, that's when he decides he's just gonna die under the enemy turret and give a solo kill.
He's just a moth to the turret flame.
But his team fighting has been really good.
Yes,
And that's the unfortunate thing is if he actually just played like a normal top laner, like if he just played like not to kill the enemy laner and then fail, he has CS leads oftentimes. He's doing well in that regard, but he's not actually. He's trying to get further leads instead of just being okay with having a pretty decent lead and then doing the right thing later on. And something that Doran has always been famous for. You look back to even the finals, where he played Gragas to a great weak side in that series where he's just like sitting up there taking the aggro and turning solo kills around the opposite, doing the anti-Doran. He doesn't get resources from his team very often, and then he does big things in the fights, and like that's still true, even though he's giving his opponent sometimes weird advantages. It hasn't always translated to that being a big deal. So I'm kind of like almost becoming a Doran defender right now because he just keeps making big impact in team fights. And like his Renekton play was really good this last week outside of lane. And then Pays, he's just insane. So even when Chovy's having an off day, even when Peanut, you can't always trust. Like I'm kind of trusting him this week. Like he had a pretty good week. I think this team, like you said, 100% they're not they shouldn't be an 8-0 team. I do agree. Like they definitely, like I feel like stole that win against KT. Like it felt like KT weren't playing. Not that they like actually stole it, but KT shut down after the pause, right? That series stopped being competitive after game 1. Then you had the Brion series. You had the close series against T1 early on in the season that like
both the T1 and
won.
the KT wins happened in the same week.
Yeah.
For GenG.
So,
and they haven't had, another top. Obviously, they haven't had another top 3 opponent since that point in time.
I want to feel like this team is definitely top 2 for sure. Like I think there's definitely a huge gap between them and T1 and also then D Plus and Hanwha, because I'm putting T1 in that tier list right now with them. A lot of people put them above. I'm not ready to do that yet, but there are warning signs and symptoms here of GenG like potentially. Now I'm not saying they're gonna bomb, but this does not look like it's going to be a perfect season. And I think that right now, I put KT at second in my after week 1 Preds, and now I'm kind of regretting not putting them in first because I think KT is going to pass them. I think it is inevitable if they continue to play the way that they are, GenG are, and KT don't drop off. Because KT also showed this week, and just talk about them for like a very brief moment, that they can play this new meta. Like, they played both the Rel, they played the anti-Rel very well, they played the Alistair compositions, they know how to play Tristana, he's down with that, so, I mean, they're ready. That was the one question mark for me for KT, is like, okay, we're shifting into a different meta. Can you keep up with that? And they absolutely did in both play and draft, so I think GenG is going to get passed by KT if this continues.
Yeah, and as we talked about last week, aiming continues to have, some standout performances, which is nice to see. Oh, by the way, guys, I do have to apologize. Last week, I pulled up last split stats on aiming, so that was my bad when I was talking about him. I accidentally pulled up the spring split stats. So that's what was going on last week. If you guys are curious, I will not do that again when I'm talking about aiming next time. But he continues to do really well. One of the things that's been kind of, I guess, well, I will use the word fun to see, has been the rise of the AP hybrid Kai'Sa build with Static Shiv and Ginsu's Rageblade and Nashor's Tooth, which is now kind of becoming a shout out to what AP Kai'Sa was last year when Faker famously started playing it, where you do get the insane Void Seeker on the low cooldown that is just absolutely blasting people with plasma procs from long range and all of the AP damage. And as we saw, especially if you guys were watching the GenG versus Brion game 1, when the Kai'Sa gets to full build, holy moly, with the Rabadon's death cap, holy moly, that will take out half the HP bar of an Aphelios or an Azir in one shot, and it's on like a 3-second cooldown if it hits.
And if you go Ludens as well, you start to be able to chain that into further poke, and you have additional burst damage. So, I mean, we're seeing a lot of different builds, and the Mythic comes in very late. Some people are building Ludens, other people are just going straight Death Cap and just skipping the Mythic entirely for a while.
I think Ginsu is much better for the skirmishing just because you do get more of the plasma procs, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's better. It's straight up better for like being an AD carry in a team fight,
right?
And the on hit effects. But I'm looking at AP Kai'Sa, and it's related to aiming, right? Because he was the AD carry who was playing AP Kai'Sa last year the most successfully. He was the most famous for playing it. We had like Faker played it mid, like you said, and Faker kind of popularized it in solo queue. But it was a great time to be an aiming fan. Then now it's like, oh yeah, aiming was really good at AP Kai'Sa. It's back. That's also good for KT.
Yeah, aiming just continues to really perform, and the dreaded Cuz fall off, it hasn't happened yet.
He's just still playing well. He just keeps playing well. He just keeps winning.
And,
He's really good.
I mean, KT did have a soft schedule against Guangdong and Nongshim. And again, like we said, they have 2 games against BRION, which are probably harder than Guangdong and Nongshim, in my opinion, next week. And it will be a while until we actually see it. It'll be 3 weeks till we see KT versus GenG and KT versus D+ in the same week. So we've got a lot of time. So the schedule is going to continue to be soft, and we'll have to see how KT adapts, because we kind of just expect them to roll over all of their opponents for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah. We'll be talking about KT a lot if they don't 4-0 bro next week, but it won't be for the right reasons.
Well, you know what's interesting also, Wolf, is that, the KT versus GenG series might decide who ends up in first place in LCK, because right now KT's only 1 game behind, even though they actually have a match loss. They're at +12 and GenG's at +13. So if they split, the series and the GenG gets their first loss against KT, that's an opportunity for KT to really leapfrog them in terms of the map score as well, because they are just that 1 game behind. So KT needs to focus on, and GenG as well, need to focus on not only winning these series, but winning them as cleanly as possible, because that map differential is probably going to be pretty important.
Yeah, and first place allows you to choose your opponent. For those who don't know, that's the in the old format, it meant just you went straight to the finals and at the top of the gauntlet. But now you get to choose your opponent in the double round or double elimination bracket. So it is a very significant advantage and allows you to basically make sure that you have the right opponent to allow you to go directly to the finals and skip that losers match. So it is very important. And this is something I was pointing out to people, because there was a period, it's not like you said, it's not 1 difference for GenG right now, but there was a moment like earlier this week where KT was actually like ahead in games, and I was like, wait a minute, and I had the same realization, because if GenG slip up even 1 time too, because I can't see right now KT slipping up. They played T1 pretty close, right, and maybe something happens against D+, but I feel like KT is definitely the stronger team there. You're really only concerned about GenG in T1 right now, and then just don't mess up. Whereas GenG, they've looked a little bit more vulnerable. Even a single loss might just be like, even if KT don't beat them, like if GenG lose to somebody else, or multiple other teams, they lose to D+ or something like that, then KT could just pass them in that way too. So it's not over till it's over, and it feels like this is the first time in a while we've actually had kind of an exciting race at the top, where it's not just like, okay, 100% it's GenG or like 100% it's T1.
Yeah,
it's actually interesting this season. So
yeah, a lot of the league is not interesting, but this part is interesting.
Yeah, the top part.
The top race, it could be quite good. All I have to say about their next matchup is that now I've seen both Keen and Doran play Quinn into Renekton, and I never want to see Doran play Quinn again. The way he was team fighting on Quinn was appalling. It was appalling, especially compared to what Keen was doing in some of those engagements by finding the flank and trying to isolate the Renekton and before a team fight started, and then watching Doran like vault into a Poppy W. So
I liked it when Doran was in the side lane in that game. I liked it when he hit the turrets.
I liked it when Doran's Quinn with Static Shiv auto attacked some turrets and cleared those minion waves super fast.
I liked it when he hit the turrets and killed the minions. Meanwhile, Keen actually team fought like a god on his Quinn game. So yeah, I don't think we'll be seeing it again. I hazard a guess. I don't think we'll be seeing it again. Remember Doran's Akshan? Yeah, we didn't see it again.
Oh my god, I forgot about that.
we have yet to see it again.
No. Okay. Well, hopefully Doran can just stick to playing Renekton, not inting in lane, and then team fighting well, because at least he's been able to do that.
Yeah.
Any other teams you want to finish up with today? Closing thoughts?
I don't really have a lot to say about Guangdong and Live Sandbox this week. They had their up and down moments. I'm pretty disappointed with DRX and Live Sandbox overall. I feel like both teams have...
At least DRX made some roster changes.
Sure.
I will say that.
We were talking about, like, I know Fate exists. I've seen him. And then, like, actually...
And also Juhan obviously coming in was important as well.
At least they're willing to do that. But I think both of these teams have weirdly regressed from last season. And that means the mentality of the players or the coaching is like either the coaching staff is pushing the players too hard, the players are frustrated, or the players are just like not motivated and they're not practicing and training as hard, or they forgot how to play together. I don't know. I mean, for DRX, I can understand it to a certain extent with the roster changes coming through. You don't have Duck Dom anymore. Yahoo came in, and then Fate's back, and clearly, like, some players didn't trust in Fate, so that's why he was benched, right? So then he's back. Are you happy with that? It's hard to say. Then they're bringing up an Academy guy in the bottom lane instead of picking the MVP AD carry from Challengers. It's just a weird, bizarre timeline, kind of maybe reminiscent of what we saw from Nongshim back in 2022. At the end of the day, though, the team just, it's not taken off. Like, it's still grounded on the runway, and Live Sandbox, which was for a long time in spring a third place team, is like, I don't even want to have a conversation about playoffs with this team right now. So
I have to say, Wolf, I did not watch the Live Sandbox games this past week because they played Guangdong and DRX. And I was not interested in this.
I'll just tell you right now. Just
you can tell me about what happened.
Just don't do it.
I am sad though, because especially watching this team be on the up and up last year with some of these same players, and then obviously losing Prince to FlyQuest, and that really hasn't worked out for either team, gotta say. Although FlyQuest did go 3-0 this last week, so that there were signs of life.
It was working out for a while.
But Teddy, I had hopes that Teddy coming back would do something, but it really just hasn't done anything.
Yeah. I mean, look, Teddy's not the problem. The team's coordination it's all over the place. Their decision making is poor, and I don't know who's at fault, so to speak, but the shot calling needs to exist or be better, basically, because it doesn't feel like that's happening at all. The DRX Live Sandbox series, because they both played against each other and they both did not look great. Like, it was not let's just say it was not a great showcasing for either team. It was an exciting series, let's say that, but I'm not really that interested in them. Bro has like given us some exciting stuff, right? They've shown us some strong early games. Nongshim,
strong early games, winnable scenarios, like competitive games, and weird picks too from Bro. So they've been fun to watch at the very least.
And Nongshim also has kind of done their own style of drafting too, and they had that great game against T1, and they're looking a little bit interesting. So, but at least for like Bro and Nongshim, they're at the bottom of the standings, and they're still trying things, and they're still impressing me. Whereas the two teams above them before playoffs are like the teams that aren't doing cool stuff and aren't impressing me and aren't growing and improving, or worse versions of their previous selves. So, yeah, I mean, this is like, I know a lot of people are really upset when we don't talk about the lower teams on this show. We talked about Bro a lot today, but like it's tough to talk about these teams without really just saying negative things. And like when they do something that like piques our interest, maybe we'll talk about them a little bit more.
Well, yeah, I think it was a good week to talk about BRION, because they actually did some good stuff this week. And we talked about DRX the week before that, so, whatever. We get there. we get around to them. Maybe we'll talk more about Live Sandbox this coming week. They play GenG. There aren't actually that many good games coming up this next week. There's T1 versus GenG, which is obviously a banger. I'll be watching, of course, both of the KT versus BRION matchups, because as much as I find it annoying they're playing back to back, I do like seeing how teams adapt against each other that quickly when we get to see both series on the same patch with a day in between to kind of adjust. So the mind games can be pretty interesting there, and I will enjoy watching those. And then also, GenG versus Live Sandbox will be another one that may be worth watching.
And one of the things I have my finger on the pulse of is D+'s week, because they theoretically have an easy week in Guangdong into DRX, but if they slip up in either of those matchups, that's very concerning. I don't think they will, but let's see how they do. Because I want to see, because they obviously had a tough week this week with T1 and Hanwha. They beat Hanwha because Hanwha had Grizzly. But let's see if they can carry some of that momentum. Obviously, losing to T1 is unfortunate, especially considering T1's current form. But maybe this week gives them a little bit more momentum back, gives them some opportunity to experiment more with their drafting. And I hope it's a strong week for D+. I hope they can pick up the 2 wins that they should realistically hope to get without any hiccups, without any setbacks. Because if they have any setbacks, then it's not good for their chances of going to Worlds, let's say.
I mean, this is the time to strike, right? This is the time for them to strike, because if they want to get ahead in the standings and make a case for themselves in playoffs, like they took a win against Hanwha, which evened up their match score in the past week, and they need to get the easy wins where they can get them, because I don't think they're going to be taking out the top 3 under current conditions.
I do agree, and I hope they deliver because it's a strong team, has great players. They need to figure it out. I want to see Deft at Worlds again. You know, could be his last year, at least for a while. He said he might return to pro play if he does have to take a break because of military service. He wants to come back even after that. We'll see what happens, but I want to see him have an opportunity to play in front of the Korean fans, right? Because obviously when he won the Worlds, it was in America. Worlds is in Korea this year.
I just want them to be good because I fucking love Canyon and Showmaker and Deft, and I love watching them play, and I want to see them play well at an international competition, and that's the frustrating part, is that they just can't get their shit together. It's a bummer. All right, guys, that's all we got for this week. We'll hit you up next week with all of the KT versus BRION and GenG versus T1 analysis and conversation, and we'll kind of sum up the first round robin that happened to LCK. See you then.